My name is Dan Finucane, and I'm currently a regent. I love folk music, blues music, and I love singing and playing with other people.
My name is Ian Peoples. I'm a Jesuit regent. I'm kind of a football fanatic. Most of my weekends are spent watching at least a few games. I'm probably one of the biggest Lionel Messi fans. Welcome back to MagisTalk. My name is Ian Peoples, and I'm joined by my co-host and Jesuit brother Dan Finucane, all the way over there. Today we have a great show planned for you. First, let us introduce our guests. First is Mr. Damian Perdomo, who is a theology instructor at St. John's College, Junior College. And Dr. Julia Hall is a retired physician who is currently in formation and training to become a deacon in the Anglican Church. We brought Damon and Julia on to the show today because they are both training to become spiritual directors through the Guadalupe Mercy Center in the Jesuit community here in Belize City. We're looking forward to hearing from them about what spiritual direction means to them and why they're seeking to become directors themselves. Before we dive in, however, we want to introduce you to this idea of spiritual direction in case it's your first time hearing it.
So within the church, there's this age-old practice that goes back to the earliest centuries of the church, which is finding somebody that you trust, a trusted companion, to talk about your relationship with God. And we know that as early as the 3rd and 4th centuries, people would leave the cities to go into the desert to find men and women who chose to live lives of prayer and discipline, desert fathers and mothers. And these folks were sought for their spiritual guidance. This tradition continued through various forms over the centuries, developing into things like retreats that we know today and periodic one-on-one conversations. Today we call this practice spiritual direction, and it's a practice that has seen a revival in the last 60 years within the Catholic Church, but also within other Christian denominations as well. And it really is, as I think everybody here can attest, a great gift to be able to share what God is doing in your life and to have someone help you hear God's voice in an even deeper way and to help us to respond to God in our lives. So, Damian and Julia, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Glad you're here.
Thank you. Thank you. It's good to be here.
And they're getting a lot of Dan this weekend because they actually have a workshop tomorrow. Dan's helping do the formation of the spiritual directors here in Belize. So please pray for them as they continue their formation as well. But yeah, it's wonderful to have you all on the show. One of the ways we usually start when we have guests on is to ask them about their upbringing and how faith played a role in their lives. For both of you, I'm interested, Damon, I know you were an art teacher at SJC, and now you're a theology teacher. And so as you kind of share your story, I'd definitely like to hear about that transition and what's inspired you to make that transition. And then Dr. Julia Hall, of course, it's not every medical doctor who trains to become a deacon, and so I'd love to hear about the role of faith in your practice as well. So, Damon, do you mind going first?
Sure, no problem.
Great.
I grew up in a Catholic household. My mother was what you would call an ideal Catholic woman. So I attended Catholic primary school, high school, the first 2 years of junior college at the 6th form. And so, being raised in the faith was always a part of it. But to be honest, being raised in the faith does not automatically make you a faithful person. So I would say most of my life, I would say that I'm a decently spiritual person, not so much of a religious person. My real spiritual journey and my religious journey, I can probably say it really happened in the last 10 years of my life. So a lot of what my mother did, who was the inspiration of my life, really. I never really understood. I used to always remember her being extreme, you know. And it's not until now that I'm into spirituality and into religion that I can understand where she was. And so, going back to my mom being the big role model in my life, my mother was an art teacher at St. John's College. She started the art program.
Oh.
So she's the original art teacher at St. John's College. And I think, again, growing up with her, always doing artwork, it was sort of inspirational. And so there was one thing I was sure of, is that I always wanted to be a teacher. So that was set. As to what I was going to teach, that was what was up in question. And I think just because I grew up with that artistic mother of mine, that I sort of had this natural ability, and I found it very easy, and also a very spiritual experience doing artwork. And so, after going to university, I returned home to Belize, and then I sort of took up the mantle from my mom and taught art for over 20 years.
Wow.
At St. John's. And like I said, my real spiritual journey sort of started recently. And so there came a point where I just felt that there was more, that I was being called for more. And that was when I had to make that tough decision to sort of leave everything I knew and was comfortable with, and to sort of venture into unknown territory.
Which is teaching theology.
Which is teaching theology.
That is entering the unknown, yes.
Very much so.
Well, wonderful. And you've been teaching theology for how
2
long?
years.
2 years now.
Yes.
So about 20 more years ago to surpass the number of years to teaching art.
I would say the minimum.
Good. And great. Well, I definitely have more questions about your faith journey, but we'll get to some of that. Dr. Julia, please share with us a little bit about your upbringing, your faith, and how it's kind of formed you.
Okay. I was born in Belize. I've lived my early life on Wagner Lane, actually, in the vicinity of the cathedral. And I'm an Anglican. My mother was a very strong Anglican. Like Damian, I've been very much influenced by my mother. I used to go to church with her. I was her youngest child, so she would take me to church. I'd go to, like on a Sunday, I'd go to the 6 a.m. Mass with my mother. I'd go to the family service at 9, and then I'd go to Sunday school at 3:30. So I sort of grew up in the church. Went to Wesley School because that was close. And my mother liked that school, so she sat me there. And then I went to high school at Wesley High School, and went to UWI, where I did a bachelor's in science. And
here in Belize or elsewhere?
In Jamaica.
In Jamaica, wonderful. Right.
Yeah. So, but I guess my spiritual life started very early because of my mother, and because she took me to church, and she made sure that I went to Sunday school, and and I learned, I was confirmed, and so growing up, religion was a part of my life. I learned all in the days that I was growing up. It was just the whole mass was sung at the end, and I really enjoyed that because I enjoy singing. So that was a big part of my life, and I loved going to church. And when I was at UWI, I did have I was not as much into into church as I was, but I did attend the chapel that they had there, but it was an occasional thing. And then I came back home and worked here for a few years, met my husband, got married, had 2 children, and then I went to the U.S. We migrated to the U.S., and I think that's when I really started seriously, not as rote. Growing up, it was more rote. You know, you went because your mother went, and you learned what was to be learned at your church, and so on and so forth. But when I got to the States, I went to a evangelical, and I did that. I was with the evangelicals for about 30 years, and one of the things that really I appreciated about the evangelicals was their Bible teaching. You know, there were house churches. You were invited to other people's houses, and you had people at your house, and you studied the Bible together, and it was very interactive. It was very interactive on a much more intimate basis than you're used to in the more formal churches, like, you know, Catholics are formal, Anglicans are formal, but there you had, you know, I really appreciated the sound Bible teaching that I got. And then I came back home, and I felt the need. I felt the need to, I guess you could call it a calling, but I felt that I wanted to be more involved with the church. It started with the praise team at All Saints, and I had I think at the highest it was about 27 young people, and we had a singing group, and we traveled around the country, and we did things. We did retreats, we did performances, and all of it was religious based, and then I started getting pulled into other aspects of the church, and feeling that I needed to take part in a deeper way in church life. And so one day I just went, I made an appointment, and I went and I sat with the bishop, and I said, you know, I think I'm being called to work in the church in a deeper way than I am now. And he said, you know, he advised me, and then it was about 2 more years before anything even happened, you know, and then the opportunity came up, and my priest said, well, you know, I think you should consider doing lay ministry. And I thought about it, and then I said, okay, let's see. And so I went into the lay ministry. I was trained to be a lay minister. I was commissioned as a lay minister, and I found that I really enjoyed working in the church. I enjoyed working with young people. I enjoyed kind of overseeing things in the church. I enjoyed planning. So
that leadership aspect.
Yes, I did. I did enjoy that, and so of course when the conversation about deacons, well, you know, the church is always looking for deacons or priests, or you know, because these days it's not as easy to. People are not as willing to go into ministry as they used to be way back when. So I guess they said, well, why don't you consider the diaconate? So I did, and I said, okay,
And when did you begin that formation for the diaconate?
About 2.5 years ago.
Okay.
So I am in my 3.5 years. It's going to be.
Great.
I'm now what they call a postulant, which is kind of like the advanced stages of training for the diaconate. So that's where I am at this point. And then, of course, the spiritual directorship came up. Didn't know anything about it at all. And that came out of the blue.
Yeah, which leads really well into our next question, I would say.
Yeah. So a lot of people at home, spiritual direction might be a new term. My sense is here in Belize, spiritual direction isn't maybe as huge of a thing yet. Yet. It will be. And so maybe for people who haven't heard as much about it and might be curious, how would you explain what it is for a kind of first time hearing about it?
And if possible, an elevator pitch. This is an elevator pitch, right? You've got to bring it down to its most basic, simplest way of explaining it. Elevator pitch, spiritual direction. What do y'all think?
My understanding of spiritual direction, like the way I understand it, is that God is present and active in all of our lives. It's just that our lives sometimes are so busy and crammed with to-dos and the pressures, and things don't go as planned. And so the relationship with God gets a little bit cloudy. And so a spiritual director, first of all, just sets that environment where someone can come in and they can share where they are in their relationship with God. And just the act of verbalizing and reflecting on what they're saying oftentimes clears up some of those clouds that in that relationship that they have with God. So really, being a spiritual director is just listening and having that person rediscover their relationship with God. It's not that we actively, tell them what to think and what to do next. It's about their individual relationship with God, because God works very differently for all of us.
Wonderful. Julie, is there anything you would add to that, or anything in a different way you would put it?
When I first was invited to enter this program, I had the idea that it would be kind of sort of like Christian counseling. And there is that aspect to it where you are giving spiritual counseling to another person. It's one Christian giving another Christian, because I think to gravitate towards or want spiritual direction, or to be a spiritual director, you need to be a Christian. I think that's the bottom line, where one Christian is helping another Christian. But since I've started the course, the training, I've come to realize that it's really facilitation. That's what I see it as. That one Christian is facilitating another Christian's relationship with God. So you are not really involved. You are helping this person to get to God, because God is self-explanatory. He's always trying to get in contact with us. He's always there. But sometimes we are not sensitive to him. We are not sensitive to how he's trying to get in contact with us. And I think that is the work of the spiritual director, to try to sensitize another Christian to the presence and the outreach of God. So,
kind of analogy that it's coming to my mind right now. It's like, when you're watching, I don't know if y'all are sports fans, right? Like football or basketball or whatever have you. When you're watching it on the TV, you can see you can see the field better than the players themselves, right? You have that bird's eye view. And so you can be like, oh, you should have passed it there. Oh, you should have ran there. Like, I feel like sometimes as a spiritual director, you can see God at work when the person on the field maybe is not looking at that direction, but like, oh no, it's right there. Like, look over here, because we're kind of given a chance to look at somebody's spiritual life as spiritual directors, which is a huge gift. Which leads me to my next question. It's kind of a broad question, but what has your experience of spiritual direction been? Or what have been some gifts from spiritual direction for you as a directee and as a director? So there's a lot. So you can just choose whatever's popping up most from those questions. Maybe, yeah, what gifts have you been given as a spiritual directee?
I think perhaps the greatest gift I've been given so far, instruction-wise, has been learning what it means to listen. It sounds like a very simple task. Oh, just listen to the person. But it's extremely involved. Putting yourself in that person's shoes, trying to understand their understanding of an experience, and not internalizing too much about, you know, it's basically trying to understand from their perspective without being too intrusive in my understanding of my relationship with God. So I kind of have to listen intently, and if I feel that, you know, just asking the right question would trigger them into a deeper thought into their experience, which sort of enriches that relationship with God. So it's sort of listening, finding little cues, seeing where they can go deeper in their reflection, and their reactions and responses to, you know, God's invitation.
And Julie, is there anything coming to mind for you?
Well, I think what I have appreciated about my spiritual directorship training, so to speak, is that I have gotten a better handle on myself spiritually. And I think I think it's necessary to be in order to be a good spiritual director, to actually have a good measure of spiritual freedom yourself. Because if you're going to be a facilitator, you have to know from where you're coming, you know, and you have to be able to be objective. And the nature of spiritual direction is such that you're going to have people who you get involved in. You know, you have to me, it appears that you have to keep yourself from becoming too emotionally involved. You have to give God a chance to work. You have to redirect the person to God, and not put your own beliefs on the person, because that's not what you're there for. You're there to help the person approach God and in a way make way for God to get to that person. So to me, it is like my self-control that I have to sort myself out to a certain extent in order to be useful to somebody trying to come to God.
Sounds like you become more aware of those ways in which maybe we tend to sometimes insert ourselves, or sometimes, you know, having that grasp of our own spiritual lives. You become more aware of what's going on inside of you so that you can be more present to the other person.
And so you can have your own stuff under control.
That's right.
So it doesn't interfere with what you're trying to do with your directee.
Yeah. I feel like listening to you all, whoever your trainers are.
It's Father Brian Christopher. He's great.
Definitely Father Brian. But I think, you know, what you're articulating, I think, is helpful, because I think sometimes I know when I first started being a directee, when I was younger, like 19, 20 years old, I remember thinking like, oh, this wise person will tell me everything I need to know.
You had a spiritual life at 19, 20 years old?
I didn't have a spiritual life, but I had a spiritual director. Distinction to be made. But I think what you articulated is like, you don't have all the answers.
No.
But it is about listening, facilitate. I really like that image of being a facilitator. And maybe, taking a step back, Damian and Julia, maybe you could talk a little bit like what drew you to spiritual direction? And I'm struck by, your trajectories, like you feel drawn into something more.
Yes.
And this is the more that you decided to say yes to. So what drew you to be a director?
When I received the invitation, I got an email and I was told, this class is forming and would you be interested? And for me, it was an answer to prayer because I had felt I wanted to know God better. I wanted to, there was just this pull in me from my soul, I guess you could say. And so it was for me an answer to prayer. And then when I started the training, I was going, yes, it really is an answer to prayer. So for me, it was God answering a prayer that I had been praying for some time.
For me, I think it was my experience in the spiritual exercises themselves. That was when I think my relationship with God really blossomed. There was so much I learned in those 7 months. And I can surely accredit that it saved me spiritually. It really, really and truly did. It has helped me so much. And I think the invitation to spiritual direction is a way to sort of pay it forward. If I can help anyone, even if it's just one person, the way the spiritual exercises help me, then that would be enough. So
I want to dig into what you brought up with the spiritual exercises because that's obviously so important to our spirituality as Jesuits, Dan and I, and the people we work with, right, our collaborators, to experience God in this way. So Damian, you went through what we would call the 19th annotation, which is sort of a retreat in daily life. So over the course of a long period of time, maybe 6 months to a year, you pray every day and you meet with a spiritual director. Usually, was it once a week? Usually?
Once a week, once every other week?
Every other week, yeah.
Every other week. And Julia, you're currently in the middle of the 19th annotation, correct?
Yeah. So,
Damian, maybe we can start with you since you talked about how this great impact in your life. Can you just describe what was that impact like? What did the spiritual exercises do for your faith life?
Well, it made me realize how very active God is in my life. And I really and truly feel like I was living life with blinders on, sort of living in a self-centered manner, focused on self and what I can acquire and building my own family and, not even spending time or considering God in my life. So it's more like existing rather than living and enjoying life. And I think that was one thing that the spiritual exercises did for me, sort of remove those blinders, and you can see God's activity every day, all the time. And it's just a wonderful thing that when you realize that you're always being invited and you're always being loved and cared for, it's just amazing.
I think we need to get Damian to write an intro to the spiritual exercises for the ideal of what it does. That's great. Thank you, Damian. Julia, what's the experience been like for you so far?
It's been, some of it, of course, has been what Damian has been talking about, realizing getting more and more into, realizing how much a part of your life God has been and is. Because when you look back on your life, you can see, God's hand all along. And as Damian had said just now, you were like not noticing, taking for granted. That's taking everything that happens to you for granted, everything good, and not giving it to God, not saying, okay, thank you, God. Never turning back to say thank you, and just kind of living your life and taking all the good stuff for granted, and so that has been one of the biggest things for me as well, just realizing how much a part of my life God is, and what He has been doing in my life. Looking back and just marveling at what God has been doing and is doing now, because now that I'm getting sensitized to His presence in my life, I see it every day, all the time. So that has been a real blessing for me.
Are you in the 4th week yet?
No. I mean, just entering the 3rd week.
Okay, well, the graces of the contemplation of divine love, 4th week grace of just recognizing God's presence and spirit and everything around us, whether it's the sun and the stars, the family, everything around us as gift. So it sounds like you've already received that grace. So when it comes along, you'll be ready to enter into that prayer. Dan, can you say a little bit about the 19th annotation?
Yeah, happy to. So the 19th annotation has been offered by Sister Sarita, who we've had on the show for the last 30 years. And Sister Sarita has retired from that position. And part of why Damian and Julia are training as spiritual directors is because they're going to direct the 19th annotation starting next year, along with the other 4 in the cohort. So if that's something that you're interested in, if you've heard about the spiritual exercises, or you're wanting to have an experience like Julia and Damian, the person to reach out to would be Father Brian Christopher, and we'll put his information on the screen. We've had Father Brian on a couple times as well, so you probably have seen him if you watch the show regularly. But he's going to be the one kind of directing the program now. But definitely stay tuned. That'll probably start sometime, I would say, in September or October.
Yeah. Great, yeah. Highly encourage everyone to, if you want to take those blinders off and just recognize God everywhere in your life, which is a good inspiration for me to really dig into the spiritual exercises on a daily basis as well, because it really is a gift.
Definitely. Our penultimate question is, we've been talking about spiritual direction. Who should be in direction? Who should, if, somebody sitting at home is like, well, what? I don't know if this is for me or not. Who should consider this?
I think any Christian should be in spiritual direction if they're if they're led to it. But I think if you're a Christian, spiritual direction is a way to really open up to God, to find God at a deeper level. And I don't think you have to be in spiritual trouble, or you have to be in, you just have to want to know God better. So I think any Christian who wants to get a deeper understanding of God should consider spiritual direction.
Damian, do you have anything to add to that, or your own ideas of who should be in it?
I think people that maybe perhaps should consider spiritual direction is if you have this desire for more, that it's always like a little calling. If you have a desire for a more intimate relationship with God, then I think it's perfect, because I think that is absolutely required. That first you have a relationship with God and you're ready for that to deepen. So anyone that is at that point, I think they're perfect for the spiritual exercises.
You mentioned something just now that made me think too, that clergy should be in spiritual direction. I don't.
Amen. Amen.
Yes, because it really that's what you should be doing as a speaker for God, so to speak.
Well, it is required for Jesuits, so that is a requirement for us.
Yeah, but it's not required for all for other religions, and I think it's something to be considered.
So Dr. Julia is calling you all out. If you're not in spiritual direction, priests and clergy, get in it.
And I think it gets back to something you were saying earlier, Julia, about how doing direction, you realize your own need to work on stuff. And I think so often, I think there's a temptation among people who do ministry that they don't need to be ministered to. And that, I think, there's a lot of reasons why that's dangerous and not good. But I think what you're saying is really important. And one of the best forms of spiritual self-care, we could call it, is to be in spiritual direction. So I think that's really well put.
So true. Yeah. Thank you. That's a great answer. It's a fantastic answer. Well, now it's our final question. Usually we tailor this final question to our topic of our conversation. So this is one that all of us will answer. But you two will go first, and then Dan and I. So the question is, what has been one of your favorite places to pray? You know, we all maybe sometimes think of places that make us feel close to God. So what's been one of your favorite places to pray? Whoever, yeah, go ahead.
Well, we have the house I'm living in right now has 2 bedrooms. We have, of course, our own bedroom, and then we have the spare bedroom. And the spare bedroom is my place to go to pray. And not only the place, but the time. I usually am in there by 3:30 to 4 in the morning. And the neighborhood is quiet. I can hear the breeze in the trees. The birds are just starting to and it is just the most peaceful, beautiful place. So that's my favorite place to pray.
And early too.
Yes, because it's undisturbed. There's no other time in the day. There's no other time in the day that you can be by yourself.
4 a.m. All right, I'm still fast asleep.
Yeah.
Damian, what about you?
It's my veranda. I have a little wraparound veranda going around the side of my house. And so I often, the railings are kind of elevated, and I have plants, running along the railing, and I have a chair that's kind of low, so I'm sort of tucked in, and that is where I'm alone. I can, again, like you, hear the wind and the birds and the activity. I can feel the breeze. I can feel the sun on my skin. And it's just a very peaceful little corner of my house that I call my space. and that is where I do most of my praying. Early morning is best for me because I'm just a morning kind of guy.
Are you in the 4 a.m. club as well?
No.
Okay, all right.
I don't do anything before 5. I don't do anything before 5.
Great. Well, Dan, what about you?
Yeah, I have to be honest. I wish I could say the place that I often pray here, but I'm not going to say that because I'm not sure it's my favorite or even one of my favorite places. So I think this is a place I've only really prayed in once, but it was so profound and stayed with me for a while. There's this national park in New Mexico in the States called White Sands Monument. And it is like being on a foreign planet or being on another planet. It's just like white sand dunes as far as the eye can see. And it was just like this remarkable experience of like kind of being in a desert and feeling, because it was so strange, like being very aware of everything. And so it's a prayer experience that like I don't go back to enough. But like that day that I was there was so profound that it's one of my favorite places. I would love to go back at some point just because it was wonderful. Ian?
This is my answer for a lot of reasons. It's a place, it's a particular spot in Grand Coteau that I love, and so in Grand Coteau there are these big oak trees, right? And these trees a lot of them have swings on them, so wooden swings. And on the oak trees is Spanish moss hanging down. There's an old cemetery right there, a field, with cattle grazing and squirrels running around and birds, and it's just such a peaceful spot because all you can kind of hear during the day usually is like there is a highway kind of close by, so you can always hear that whir of tires on pavement. But besides that, it's often very quiet and just peaceful, and I remember having a particular prayer experience out there where I just saw the sort of the community of creation, right? Like the Spanish moss needs the tree, and the squirrel needs the tree, and the tree needs all these things to survive. And then watching cattle walk out in a single file line with no one guiding them but their own.
Harmony of nature.
It was harmonious, at least for a moment, right? At least for a moment, it was harmonious. And so, but I look back to that spot as just a great representation of kind of what Grand Coteau, this place where I spent the first 2 years of my Jesuit life, which was a very, very peaceful, by and large, peaceful time in my life, and it's a place that represents Grand Coteau for me really well. So, yeah, the wooden swing under the oak tree in Grand Coteau.
There you go. So 4 very different places, different times of the day. So praying, in various places, various times can be a powerful experience. I just want to say, certainly thank you for being here. Thanks for being on our show. And I want to point out, because our show is called MagisTalk, that we've been using the term Magis a lot on the show today, talking about wanting more.
More. That's right.
And I think this is an episode that I think really touches on what our show is all about. And hopefully it stirs something in you, desire for more in your relationship with God. These are 2 people that have answered that call. And so thank you, Julia and Damian, for your honesty and sharing with us.
Thank you.
And maybe they'll be your spiritual director one day.
That's right.
There you go.
All right, well, let us know if you have any questions on Facebook or YouTube about spiritual direction, and if we see those, definitely answer them. And again, thank you all for being with us, and we look forward to being with you, the audience, in the coming weeks. God bless you all.